Hi everybody. If you ever felt lost learning Revit API, then I got really good news for you. Because in this video, we're gonna go through a bunch of resources which can be really helpful for any Revit API developer. With these resources, you'll be able to find a lot of code snippets, some explanations, and hopefully they're gonna save you nerves and help you learn Revit API. I wouldn't dare to rate these resources. Instead, we're just gonna kind of categorize them and go through different categories one after another, starting with the documentation. I know documentation sounds very boring, but without documentation there wouldn't be any programmers, so I think it's a good place to start. When it comes to documentation, first of all I have to mention Revit API documentation. You already know this resource pretty well. We select Revit API year, then we look for one of the classes, and inside of there we can find a lot of information. Get some descriptions, see what it's based on, some examples, its inheritance hierarchy, and most importantly different methods and properties and how to use them. I'm not gonna go any deeper in Revit API documentation website because you know it pretty well. The next documentation website I want to mention is the pyRevit developers documentation. You can just search for pyRevit dev docs and you will find this Notion page. And this is an excellent resource for pyRevit developers. In here you get your Get Started section, a few tutorials from the Eshan himself. Most importantly, there are a lot of these reference pages. For example, if you're gonna go to effective inputs, in here you will see a lot of different code snippets and on the right the screenshots of what they return. And it's very easy to use. Just copy this code in your pyRevit scripts, execute it, and this is the result you're gonna see in your scripts as well. Alright, I hope that you're gonna explore pyRevit developers documentation on your own because there's really a lot to find out. And now we're gonna go to the next resource, and it actually comes from Autodesk, and it's Autodesk Revit Developers Guide. I'm gonna just write here Autodesk Revit API Developers Guide. Then in here you can see the first one, Revit API Developers Guide. It opened it for Autodesk Revit 2022, but we can always come here in the URL and change it to something else. Let's say 2024 for example. And there is also this Revit Developers Guide right here. You can open it and in there there's a lot of information. Personally, I didn't know about this resource for years, until I stumbled on it when I was preparing for one of the lessons about events or filtering, something like this. And it was really good documented. For example, if I'm gonna go to Advanced Topics, Events, and just click on it, in here there is just a general documentation, and then all these events are separated in different categories. There's database events, and I could see all the event names and which are already categorized pretty well. Then the same is going to be for the user interface, registering events, canceling events, and it's pretty good documentation. It's going to be all in C#, but this is not a problem because we can always translate it with our ChatGPT or any other AI models. I'm going to show it later as well. For example, here in Dynamic Model Update, which is for iUpdater, I found it really interesting that they explain you how to implement it and how to work with execute method, how to register. Most importantly, they can also mention different errors and warnings that you might encounter that you should be aware about. And this is why I find this resource is really good. So I hope that you're gonna find something in this Revit API Developers Guide that's actually gonna help you in your Revit API scripts. And now let's talk about the last resource in the documentation category, which is gonna be Dynamo Python Primer. Here's the URL if you want to, but you can see in there are different sections. There's Hello Pythons, seeing the bigger picture, getting started, and then there's the fourth Revit specific topics, which is about Revit API. There's Introduction to Revit API, and all these pages, they are very short to just get you enough so you can understand it. How to read documentation, this is actually pretty good because they show you that here's the documentation, here are different sections you might want to pay your attention to, how to work with parameters and so on. It's kind of give you this small roadmap on how to work with different things and also kind of teach you along the way. But also, if you're a beginner who just starts to learn Revit API or you just want to have more different examples of Revit API scripts, then we can check the next resource, which is my ebook, The Beginner's Guide to Revit API. And it's absolutely free, and you can get it on learnrevitapi.com/ebook. In here, you just put your email and you'll get this PDF guide. And you see guys, Revit is not perfect, but Revit API can make it so much better. And this is the premise of this ebook, because in there I will teach you a lot. Let's open it and I will briefly just scroll through so you can get the feel of what kind of PDF guide it is. In there, I put a lot of explanation on different topics. I help you understand how to use Revit API with Python, what do you need to learn for using Python, and even where you can learn it. From there, I just go in Revit API topics such as installing Revit plugins and configuring your environment, Also, there are going to be a lot of links to YouTube videos which will help you even further. So from here you can see there's really a lot of information you can get about Revit API. And I try to make it as a roadmap where you start on section 1, 2, 3 and slowly you build up your Revit API skills, which will allow you to code even more. Let's see, there is like read properties, how to work with parameters, then transactions, how to make changes in Revit API, how to get different elements, and there are lots of graphs and code examples I fit in there. So you can get it and explore it on your own, and as I said, it's absolutely free. Now, the next, I want to talk about where can we find a lot of different code examples. There are going to be different categories. I'm going to start first with the pyRevit extensions. Let's go to Revit for that, because you see, in pyRevit, every single line of code is open source, and it means that we can access it and read it ourselves. Not only we can read about how the pyRevit works itself, we can also read about each individual button in pyRevit. For example, in here, let's click on the sheets, and in here we want to take one of the tools. For example, we like this one, set crop region to selected shape. You can see there's even a description of what it does, and in there you can create some kind of shape with the lines, then select it, and you can apply this shape to be the new crop box of your view. For example, maybe you want to copy the whole script or just part of it. You can hold Alt and click on the button itself. This will open the folder where it's located. In here you can see the structure of the folder, there's this tooltip MP4, there's script file, the icon, the bundle. We're interested in the script obviously. When you're gonna open it, here's the source code and you can have a look how does it work. You can find different snippets which you can copy and paste in your script, or even you can copy the whole button and put it in your extension and then slowly start working on it and add more changes to customize it. And it works for all pyRevit extensions, and there are quite a lot of them actually. You can click here on the pyRevit pull-down menu, and there's extensions menu. And in here you'll see even more extensions, and they keep adding even more extensions here with each update of pyRevit. So have a look. Here's for example my EF Tools extension, and you'll see it's also pasted on the GitHub repository. We can click on this link and it will open the GitHub repository of my extension. And you can scroll through and see all the code and all the tools that I have written. And also, before I go any further, a really good tip. Whenever you use GitHub, just come in here and change this .com to .dev. This will actually launch an online version of the Visual Studio Code IDE. Now we can explore this whole GitHub repository inside of Online IDE. And this is really helpful. You can just go through all of your scripts, you can use this command on the top as well, and also you can make changes. For example, in here, if I want to write print hello world, I could do that. And I can also save these changes inside the GitHub if I have the rights. In this case, I definitely don't want to do this, but I just wanted to let you know that this is a great way to explore any GitHub repository. Now, let's go back to pyRevit extensions, and you see there is not just my EF Tools extension, but there are really a lot of different extensions. And the same as pyRevit, we can also explore any code we want. For example, let's come in here and say that in walls, I want to know how do we modify wall constraints. I'm going to hold Alt and click on the button. This will also open the folder where it's located. Here's the PyCharm script, and when I open it, I can just scroll through the code and see how it works. There's a function I created to select desired levels, and then you can see select walls, get user input, and modify walls. And you can use it for learning and also for reusing in your own scripts. I highly encourage you to do that. Now, you saw that we had a bunch of different extensions to choose from. But if we're gonna go to GitHub, and in the GitHub, right here in the search, we're just gonna come and write pyRevit. Click on enter. Obviously, you will find the repository for the pyRevit itself. However, you will also find 230 other repositories related to pyRevit. In here you will see there are different extensions which we saw in pyRevit, like pyRevit Plus, pyRevit MEP, pyTiba, EF Tutorns, pyApex, and so on. But there are also the ones that were not listed there, such as pym4b, which is made by Giuseppe Dotto, then Guru from Aussie Beam Guru, Revitron, and many more. You can just scroll here and get completely lost in all the examples you can find for pyRevit. And this is also something I encourage you to do. Just go through and see what kind of tools are available. Because maybe if you really struggle with the code, there's already something very close to what you're trying to create. And it will be much simpler to take that code as a base and then redo to actually match your own needs in the office. But if somehow you go through all the pages and you run out of all the examples and you want more, Just come here on the top and change it to Revit API. Obviously, you're not only gonna see the Python codes, but also you're gonna see the C# code. As you can see right here, this is a C#, this is a C#. But you can still scroll through and find even more different examples of Revit API code. And sometimes it might be also good to not check just the Python codes, but also see the C# code, because you can easily translate C# to Python and you'll have even more examples for Revit API. For example, let's have a look at the repository of the Amor Sol, who is extremely involved in Dynamo development. In there, he also has a Revit API folder, and there are a bunch of different scripts he prepared. For example, here is copy-paste filters.py. You can click on it and you can see examples that he uses in his Dynamo Python nodes. And from here, you can find really a lot of examples. Lastly, before gonna go any further, there is one extension which is not on GitHub, but on the Bitbucket, which is pretty much the same thing, but has a bit different features. In there, you can find custom tools extension. And it's a really good extension by David Vatkekti. I have no idea how to pronounce it, I'm sorry. But you will find a lot of good examples in these extensions as well. So I strongly recommend you to have a look here as well. Alright, enough about GitHub and pyRevit extensions. You've seen that there are hundreds of different examples we can find. Now, let's talk about Revit API SDK. This is the software development kit from Autodesk. You can download it here. Here's the latest version, and there you can download the past SDK versions. And when you're gonna install it, it's gonna look like this. You're gonna get a folder, and inside of it, you will find a lot of different examples. There's even this pocket version of the Autodesk Revit documentation, where you can find all information about your classes and methods, exactly like the online version. But there are also a folder for the samples. And in here, there are a lot of different samples on different topics. For example, in here you can see examples about Geometry API. You can click on it, then there is different examples. Maybe I want to find something about computed symbol geometry. You can even see Revit examples and then the C# code. Everything is going to be in C# here, because this is officially supported language for Revit API. But you can still find different snippets from here and use it in your code. And also, if you don't want to install this Revit API SDK, you can go to Jeremy Tamik GitHub, and there is a Revit SDK samples repository. In here you'll see it's made for the Revit 2021 SDK, and if you come here, you will see all the samples as well. But also, if you're a Python user and you don't enjoy actually going through C# code, translating it and back and forth, I can also recommend you to go to learnrevitapi.com. And here in the resources, you'll notice that I have my Python snippets page. You can click on it. And in here, from time to time, I just come here and drop different snippets which you can use in Revit Python shell or pyRevit. For example, here's how to create solid geometry from an area. Let me just zoom out a little, and you can see there are really a lot of different examples here. I'll just zoom again. For example, you wonder, how do you create a beam? Here is an example. How do you copy elements with Revit API? Another example, and so on. I show you how to convert different units, how to create room, different elements. How does element parameter filter works? There's gonna be some snippet. And in here you can find a lot of different snippets. I try to come here as often as possible and drop the snippets. Sometimes I just forget, and then later I just come and add 10 different snippets. So hopefully you will find something that you need in here as well. Now, another places where you can look for the code snippets is this. Let's go to apidocs.co, which is also a documentation for Revit API. Here you can see there's Grasshopper, Navisworks, Rhino. If we are interested in Revit, now we can go to some class, for example, maybe element intersects element filter. Let's click on it. And here's this class. You will find the same things as in Revit API documentation, but also you'll notice there is this symbol of the code. And it says code search. So when I click on it, it will go through different examples in GitHub or maybe somewhere else and have a look at all the places where it might encounter the same class name or the method name. And you might get some examples here. What's important here is that it points you to the GitHub repository. You can see in here it takes from Jeremy Tamik the building coder samples, and here is the file where it comes from. And these are hyperlinks, so you can click and see where it was mentioned. For example, let's go back, and this is where it was mentioned in proximity detection CS in Revit SDK samples. We can click on it. This is the repository. This is the code. So instead of using this, I use another two websites which have exactly the same function to find the code examples of the function or class or method that you are using. For that, just come in here and write python.hotexamples. Or we can also write C#.hot examples. So this is gonna look for the C# code examples from over 1 million projects on the GitHub, maybe at some other places as well, I'm not sure. Let's try exactly the same thing here. I'm gonna write here element intersects element filter. And I'm also gonna do the same for the C# hot examples. Then in here, you will see if you get any matches. For example, for the Python scripts, I found one match right here, which is Autodesk Revit DB element intersect element filter. Exactly what I need. So I'm gonna click here. There's gonna be a lot of ads, but you can also block it with some ad blocker. Here's the Python code example, and you can also see where does it come from. You can see the repository and actually the file where it comes from. In here, it's a fairly good example actually. Here's how to use element intersect element filter. You can create some categories and then you can just create and get some element. This is great. But what I like about it, again, you can find a lot of repositories this way as well. For example, this was named Dynamo, but in here there are lots of Revit API scripts as well. Here you see there are a bunch of different examples and maybe there is something that you find useful. For example, maybe you wonder how do you remove paint now? Just come in here, have a look at this example, but in here I can see that it's made for Revit API in Python nodes inside of Dynamo, which is also not a problem. You can always convert it to the pyRevit script, or maybe you use it inside Dynamo as well. So I definitely recommend you to have a look at these websites. There are a lot of different examples you might find out of nowhere. And the more places you have to look for the examples, I think the better. Alright, so now you know where to find different documentation, examples, explanation, and most importantly code snippets. But sometimes this is not enough, because you can find a code snippet even in Python or in C#, and you might not understand how does it work, or there is some weird things happening. And for this, I really recommend you to use different AI tools, like ChatGPT, the Cloud, the Grok, all these chat models. You can choose any one you like. In my case, I'll just open ChatGPT as an example. This is a really good place because not only you can ask for the code, not only you can ask for the explanation, you can also ask it to translate C# to Python. And usually I just paste some kind of code snippet, then I write translate to Python. Also, I really recommend you to write do not change anything, do not write any new imports, variables, just translate the provided snippet to Python. Because oftentimes it starts to translate it, but it also says like, hey, there were no any imports, there were not mentioned some variables, and starts making up a lot of extra code, which also can lead to more errors you have to solve. So therefore, I like to add this comment. Now here's the translated snippet in the Python code. I can ask it what does it do, and it will continue explaining me what's going on, also describe me initiation phase, all the variables, what is transaction, element selection, and so on. And these AI chatbots are really insane because you can use them as one-on-one tutoring, and it's probably gonna do even better job than the human would. But it depends, because Revit API is very niche and it might not have enough information, and often it will still start hallucinate. Keep that in mind. Also, another tool that I want to mention is GitHub Copilot, which is like AI pair programmer. It's really good because it works directly from the IDE and it supports Visual Studio, PyCharm, and all the most popular IDEs. In here, you can highlight different code, ask for explanation, ask it to write some code. Personally, what I found is it's really good at writing different doc strings, at reformatting code, and just pointing out different little things. But I used it quite a long time ago, and it was not as good at writing Revit API snippets. There were a lot of hallucinations and errors, so I had to solve them, and sometimes it was just easier to write it myself. But also keep in mind that since then, a lot has changed, and they improved a lot, and recently I saw a really big update they made about workspaces in GitHub, which I need to test. But don't worry, I'm gonna make a separate video where I'm gonna show how good Copilot is for Revit API and if you start using it as soon as possible. Lastly, about AI tools, there's one website which really caught my attention. It's called chat.lmsys.org, and it's a very interesting website because in here you will find all the chat models and you can compare them side by side. For example, here's the arena battle where you have two random models and you can ask the same question. For example, in here, let's write me a Revit API code for pyRevit to get all walls with beton in type name and height of more than 1 meter. In here, we're gonna see responses from two random AI chat models, and we'll see which ones in the end. You can see that one jumped straight into the code, the other one started mentioning all the documentation, and they definitely show you different approaches. Let's have a look at the right one, getting all the walls, then it's kind of filtering, and with the for loop, just filters all the walls which have beton, and also if their height is more than 1. But it doesn't convert the units, so there is an issue for sure. So yeah, both of these examples are actually not true, because the model got confused or doesn't know that all the units in Revit API are in feet. I'll still say that B is better, but now you can see on the right it was Claude 3 Haiku model, and on the left it was actually GPT-4 model. And I think it's a pretty good resource to actually test different models side by side. So huge shout out to Ilya who showed me this website. Right here on the top you can also go to Arena side by side, and you can actually select the models that you want. Let's say that you want to take the newest GPT-4 or which was just released 2 days ago. And on the right, I'm going to take something maybe from the Llama, which is the 70B. Let's write exactly the same thing. I'm also going to give it a few more clues because I want to use element parameter filter and logical filter, because I know it will make the code a bit more efficient and also a bit more complicated to write for the AI. Alright, they finished it. Now I get completely different results, and first of all, it's just because I provided it more details. I didn't just say do this kind of task where it has to be like beton in the type name and height of 1 meter. Instead, I also mentioned I want you to use these classes. I want to use element parameter filter and I want to use logical filters. And now it tried to combine and do it exactly like I wanted. Therefore, I think we got a little bit better results. So whenever you use chatbots, try to give it as much details as possible. So now in here you can see it created element parameter filter for contains beton rule, which I think actually gonna work well. But also it's making it here as well. It has a bit different styles. I like the one on the left much more because it's more readable. This is a bit less readable, but also a bit shorter and quicker written code, which also might be a good idea sometimes. Then creates another filter for the greater than 1 meter rule. And again, I can see it did not convert units from feet to meters. But if I would point it out, it would definitely do this. Then combine these filters here. Yeah, based on the code that I personally like to write, I'm definitely gonna give it to the left one. I'm gonna say the A is better, which was GPT-4o model, which is the latest model of ChatGPT. Alright, but now let's say that you found the scripts that you wanted, you found the explanation, you tried chatting to AI tools, you still have a problem. This time it's probably for you to go and look at the forums. There are a few great forums for Revit API developers. First of all, if you're a Revit API developer with a Python, then pyRevit forum is going to be the best place to ask questions. It's a very active community. You will also often hear from the Jean-Marc, just like pyRevit uncle. He's very involved in the development, in organizing the events, and also here on the forum. And in general, this is a place you can ask anything about pyRevit, and people are very responsive here. Then another place you can also try your luck is Autodesk Revit API forum. In here, you can also ask anything related to Revit API, but keep in mind that here, I think the majority is already going to be in C#, but you will still see occasional questions about Python, and you can also get great results here. And lastly, if you are using Revit API inside of Dynamo, why not try to use it in forum Dynamo Beam? This is a very active forum as well, there are lots of users, but if your questions are going to be more advanced in Revit API realm, obviously there are going to be less people who will actually join to answer, but there are still a lot of people who know Revit API inside of Dynamo forum. So highly recommended this as well. And lastly, in general, when you want to do anything in Revit API, it's really worth just go and Googling it or asking ChatGPT or any other AI models. Sometimes there are already answers to your questions. And oftentimes you will end up on the Builder Coder blog, because in here there's a lot of answer on Revit API questions. Majority is going to be in C#, but as I showed you earlier, it's not a problem to take the C# code and ask ChatGPT or any other model to translate it to Python. And usually that's a pretty good job. But also, you can check my own blog on learnrevitapi.com. In here, I don't blog as often, but when I do, I try to put a lot of information in there. For example, in here you can learn how to convert different coordinates in Revit API, and there is a video and the code, and not really much explanation. However, for other topics like suppress warnings, I actually had a lot of time and I wrote out a much more detailed blog post right here. So it really depends on the topic and on how much time I had when I had to write something. But I heard from a few people that I saved them a lot of hours just with one of the articles here. Maybe you'll find something that will help you a lot as well. I'll just scroll through a few examples so you can get an idea what you can get here. But in general, there are going to be a bunch of code snippets, written explanation, and if you're lucky, there's even going to be a video. And also, I recommend you to join my Revit API newsletter. In there, I try to send out short emails once in a while where I'm going to teach you something about Revit API. I'm going to send you some graphs about Revit API, some code snippets, or just updates that there is a new resource, there is a new tutorial, or something like this. I think that you will also find a lot of value here as well. And lastly guys, if you want to take a huge shortcut in learning Revit API and really go through all the basics and see lots of examples in action, I strongly recommend you to check learnrevitapi.com. And this is probably the biggest course in Revit API because I'm still working on it. I started making videos 2 years on about it, and I'm still working on these videos. This is my Revit API course platform, and usually I was making launches and then closing the platform, but soon I'm gonna reopen it and it will always stay open. The moment you join it, you will get access to the course platform. You'll get access to the Discord community that I have, and also there are a bunch of different lessons on different topics. And I'm gonna teach you Revit API step by step here. We're gonna start with preparing Revit API development environment, how to read and understand documentation, how to select and read properties, then we're gonna take parameters, transactions, how to get elements, how to work with filters, how to create UI forms, how to work with views, and I'm still adding more and more lessons here. And this is how the lessons look in general. In here, first of all, you're gonna have a video where I try my best to explain you the topic. Then if relevant, you're gonna find some downloadable files and resources, and then the summary of the lesson in the written form, which people find really useful, especially when English is not the mother tongue. So you can see in here all the code snippets, again all the explanations, some screenshots, and on the bottom, if you still have questions, there is also going to be linked Discord chats where we can discuss the lesson, ask questions, and see if I can help you any further. Definitely check it out if you're interested in learning Revit API and you want to follow along the system, which will take you from zero to someone who can create a lot of Revit API plugins. Alright, and now let's wrap up this lesson. There were a lot of different resources and I'm going to compile them either in a blog post or maybe some downloadable file. I'm going to leave a link somewhere in the description. But also, if there are resources which you expected me to mention and I did not mention, please drop them in the comments. I know there are a ton of more different resources for Revit API and pyRevit developers. I just couldn't fit everything in here, and also I don't know about all of them. I just know that there are really a lot of them. And now, thank you for watching this far. As usual, I want to say huge thanks to my supporters on Patreon, and I want to wish you happy coding. Goodbye, hope to see you in the next video.